This week, a look at another graphic novel from our friends at Avery Hill Publishing. Jason and I discuss Sennen by Shanti Rai, a book encompassing both coming of age and recognition of global inequality issues. I'll also talk with Shanti herself about the book and how her bicultural background helped inspire it. First, if you appreciate the work we do on deconstructing comics and our other podcasts and want bonus content, we'd love it if you'd support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. Our monthly issue-by-issue look at 1960s Amazing Spider-Man comics is available to patrons chipping in at least $4 a month. Coming at the end of this month, we discuss the final Steve Ditko issue. Check out our goals and rewards and pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
This is Jason.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo and Jason in Portland, Oregon. What's going on?
Not much. I think it's time that we let the listeners know that you and I are actually playing the intro music.
Yeah, we're jamming out.
Oh, that's me on the drums and you on the guitar. And that's our other business that we don't talk about. But
sure. Yeah. That's why we're rolling in dough.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm a dozenaire. I have dozens of dollars. Ooh.
Okay, so we have another book from Avery Hill this time. This is called, my Japanese is influencing how I approach unfamiliar words here, but I would say Sennen, which means 1,000 years in Japanese, but I don't think that has anything to do with this. Later on in this episode, I'm going to be talking with the author, Shanti Rai, so we can find out about pronunciations and stuff like that.
I was saying it's Sennen.
That may be. Yeah, like I said, my Japanese is influencing how I approach unfamiliar words.
Yeah. It's a beautiful name. It's a beautiful title.
I have a summary kind of up to the spoiler point. Sennen is a girl, probably like a teenager. She lives in a farming town in a valley where they have a harvest festival every year and thank their gods, who are clearly visible beings who look like humanoid goats. And Sennen isn't so impressed by the gods, and she says some things that people around her say are blasphemous. Now, we meet her family, which I have to pause here because I got really confused in that scene.
It's intentionally unexplained, which I think is to its strength.
Well, the first thing that threw me was that this character says that Sennen's my daughter, and I looked at the hair and the clothes, and I said, this is a woman. This is her mother. And later I found out this person is called Dad, was kind of her foster parent when her mother maybe died in childbirth, apparently. And then this other guy who is called Baba, which again, Japanese is influencing me because that means grandmother. But I took him to be her older brother, but apparently that's her dad. And
yeah, there was a tragedy, a sort of barely explained tragedy, in which the father lost the mother and was, grieving and couldn't be a good father to Sennen. And this foster parent stepped in.
Well, and he punched a god because the god wouldn't explain what happened to his wife, so Baba was thrown in jail for a while.
Right. So the punching a god. Hey, great work if you can get it. So yeah, I like that there is sort of like this blended, unusual family, which is more common outside of like Western cultures. Families can come together in many different shapes and sizes, and I like that was sort of neatly tucked in there and not over-explained.
Yeah, well, it wasn't.
It did throw me off that the foster father had long hair.
Yeah, so apparently now Baba and Dad are in a relationship. It was really vague.
Well, what kind of relationship that is undefined, right? It could be any number of things. They could just be sort of like emotional housemates. I thought that was actually one of the more clever bits of the book, was that these relationships were not overly defined. They weren't the point of the book.
No.
It was just window dressing of this world.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's one thing I think that this author does really, really well, is builds a feeling of time and place through their characters, through the artwork. There is a splash page on page 10 where Sennen is walking towards the town, and it's a really breathtaking illustration of the town.
Mm-hmm.
And the art style is simple, but it's also really warm. And it does a really good job of creating an environment, a time, and a feel, and just a vibe, like a tone.
Mm-hmm.
This is these pages. You look at these pages, and you can hear a soundtrack in your head when you look at them. It's that that compelling.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to say a little bit more in summarizing the first part of the story.
I'm sorry.
So Baba is worried about her saying blasphemous things because after his punching of a god, he feels like people are hypersensitive to what their family does anyway. And then the chief and two of these gods come to the door and say Baba has to be taken away as a human sacrifice. And he and some others are tied up and sacks put over their heads, and they're put on a boat, and Sennen swims after them, and then she finds out what's really going on. And I don't want to get into too many details beyond that point.
And then she finds out what's really, really going on. Kind of. So I would just say, if you're applying hard sci-fi logic to this story, it's going to disappoint you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is dealing an analogy and a young person's view of religion, and who makes our, like, the working class, like who makes the things that we enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like poorer countries and richer countries and that kind of thing.
Yeah, this was sort of like a micro version of like the United States and Latin America, and all sort of stacked together. So I would say these targets are younger, for a younger audience than either you or I.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem with a lot of comics these days. They're not for old men like us.
I know, we keep getting older, and they keep making more creators, right?
Like practically every webcomic is like, this is for people half my age.
Which is good. Like, not every comic. If every comic book appealed to middle-aged white guys, how boring would comics be?
Yeah.
Right? So the whole point is that we will eventually be pushed out of the way, and then this author will one day feel old too.
Yeah, yeah.
Hakuna Matata or something. I don't know. I'm at peace with my mortality. I know that I'm closer to the end than the beginning. And, this is the type of work I probably wouldn't have appreciated at this age, because I was so steeped in Marvel comics and traditional mainstream Western comics. But this is, I found it really charming, and I found, once I could relax and not be like, but what about this? Like, the gods are among you? Like, why don't you just tackle them? But there is this idea of, like, religion as an act of control and being born into traditions that you should question and you should think about rejecting. And the stuff in the town is really great because, the town is suspicious of Sennen and her family, and it could be for any number of reasons that people in the real world could have neighbors that are suspicious of them, or their values, or their culture. So I thought that translated really well to the modern world. And I think anytime, if you do a story in fantasy or science fiction and it has parallels to the modern world, that's great. I think that was successfully done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's clear what kind of the point is, because the story itself ends unresolved. It feels more like it's a call to action to the reader, because it's just the note it ends on is, we have to try to end the slavery of the poorer people, to kind of have a more equal world. And she befriends some of the people in the richer area who also didn't know what was going on, and thought that all the stuff they used was being produced like through automated means rather than slave labor.
Right. So, I mean, you could look at Sennen and her family as like Amazon workers, right? Amazon warehouse workers. So, like in the other world where she goes to, she crosses the threshold and she finds this other world. And, the people there, do they know where it comes from? Do they care? Like, maybe not everyone cares who is making their things, as long as they get their things. Mm-hmm. And I think that's analogous to the real world too. Like, people don't want to think too long about why things are so cheap, although they're not so cheap anymore, but why they were so cheap
Yeah.
for the longest time. So about the ending. So yeah, about 10 pages from the end of this, I don't want to spoil, like the second half of the book, it's into spoiler territory, because there are reveals and we don't have to ruin every book for everybody. But about 10 pages from the end, I was like, they're not going to wrap this up, are they? So there are questions and mysteries that go unanswered in this volume. But I also think, like you said, it leaves you with a rallying call. So it's not quite a conclusion to the story. It is open-ended, but maybe that's life, is open-ended, and it is a call to action to the reader to think about a lot of the questions that Sennen is going through.
Now, I thought it was interesting, a little bit before the end, there's this bit about how the richer group uses the slave labor from the poorer group to build ships and to crew them and to go out and look for other people like the wealthier people. But those ships never come back. And like, what is this analogous to? Is it like, I mean, I've never heard of such a thing as like slaves being sent out to look for life on other planets, but it kind of feels like that's what's being suggested.
I was thinking of like, colonialism and just the new world and how dangerous it was to send a ship out. Yeah, there is a lot to chew on in the back half of the book, and again, sometimes realism, like looking at like, wait, how did this happen? Like, how did this get put together? I think that's not how you should approach this story, because there are seams in the science fiction of it all, but there is strength in the character work and the struggle that Sennen is going through with her family, with her environment, with her world. And a good story should always hit like the personal, like local conflicts and what is the global place that they find themselves in. So I thought it was, even though it doesn't have a hard tying up all the loose ends, I thought it did have a solid conclusion and a nice call to action to the reader. And once I realized, initially I was like, but
Yeah.
and then I was like, but it's not for me. I'm a middle-aged man. This is skewing for someone 30, 25 years younger than I am. And there's a lot here to appreciate from a storytelling perspective. The colors too. It's really rich, warm illustrations. I like the hand lettering a lot. It really has a charm to it, and I thought it was well done. But I also think like it also feels like this could be continued in more volumes if they chose to.
Yeah, I would like to see what happens next, but maybe, I think she's saying that's up to us, but still, I would like to know more about what happens in this world.
Yeah, I'm a plot queen. I like really strong, tightly plotted pieces, and this is something else. This is a character piece. This is driven by a character, and I think she's saying we don't have all the answers. We don't get conclusions. Sometimes we don't get happy endings. All we can do is try. So the ending of the book could be, just decades of her life trying to make sense of the world that she has found herself in. Yeah.
One mystery I'd like answered is why on page 71 a guy's stocking cap gets blown off. Since when do stocking caps get... Usually they're stuck on pretty tight, so I don't know how the wind carries it away, but anyway.
You're right. This book is so unrealistic. What are they thinking? 1 star for stocking caps. 1 star for stocking cap logic. I remember thinking that too. Like, I thought that was such an interesting character moment to put in here. They do a good job of making these other characters feel like they're not just there to prop up Sennen and her journey and her story. They do feel like a gang that existed before and will exist on, and could walk off the page in any direction and still be characters, still have a life. Yeah, there are little things like it's surprisingly easy to break into places.
It happens that there's a typhoon going on, or a hurricane or whatever, so that means there are no guards. Okay.
It keeps the story moving. It keeps it simple. I wouldn't want it to be longer. Like it's pretty clear. You use coincidence to keep the story moving.
Yeah, just like any soap opera.
Right. Or kids material. This is skewing younger. This is not realism. This is character work. This is questioning the culture that you were born into, and probably being frustrated with older generations and why they do certain things that don't make any sense. which is pretty a universal, I think, experience to every generation. We look forward and go, why would you do these things? And now you and I are the people doing those things, living the life that people younger than us are like, can these old people just get out of the way already? We're working on it, kids. We're working on it. Every day I'm closer.
I should say regarding the art, it's we notice the art when there are problems. Like, I didn't understand what was going on here, but when I'm critiquing a book and I'm thinking about it, like, I never got lost in the art. I always knew what was happening in the story. I thought that was all really solid.
Yeah, the storytelling is on point. It's skewing younger than I would normally read, but I thought it was successful. So yeah, this publisher is doing great work. I mean, this is completely different than the last book that we looked at, right?
Yeah, Suzanne. Very different.
It's very different, but it's also competently made, and it's also the type of book that will stand out because it's not a superhero book. It's not your traditional sort of. So many artists today draw like Jim Lee, right? And I appreciate a completely different approach and something that's less stylized and more just like the line work is really crisp and solid. Even if it doesn't really vary in a lot of weight, it's really clean. Yeah, so it's well done. I would give this book to like my nieces or nephews. I would give this book to someone in the teen years. I think this would be a great gift to somebody.
Coming up, Sennen author Shanti Rai on what inspired the book, working with an editor for the first time, and the unexpected obstacle that slowed down the making of the book. But first, a reminder to join us for 20th Century TV and music trivia quiz videos and more on our Patreon page. Every month, patrons donating $4 a month or more also get a full-length podcast episode reviewing an issue of The Amazing Spider-Man by Lee and Ditko, and will continue through the transition to John Romita Sr. Check out our goals and rewards at patreon.com/deconcomics. If you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
Hey, Batman! Oh, you must be, because that's Robin. Hi, Robin.
Yes, Batman and Robin are here, and Tim and Paul are also here to evaluate the Batman TV show that took the nation by storm in 1966.
How in the name of purple wombats do they manage that?
To the Bat Polls podcast looks at the writing, the music, the guest stars, how the show fit into its times, and much more. Look for it wherever you get podcasts or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. Why, listening to the Bat Polls even makes Season 3 enjoyable.
Gosh, yes, Batman. When you put it that way.
All right, well, now I am on Skype with, I hope I say your name right, Shanti Rai?
Yeah, I mean, you said the surname perfectly. No one ever gets that right.
Oh, Rai? What did people say?
In England, most people say Ray.
Ray, I guess I can see that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I mean, I'm just pronouncing the vowels as they're pronounced in romanization of Japanese, so...
Yeah, it works out. It's a
works.
Bengali name, so maybe it's like something about the Asian pronunciations. It works.
Yeah, or romanizations of languages that are usually written in other writing systems.
Yeah.
Bengali, did you say?
Yeah. So my dad's from Bangladesh. So my it's pronounced Shanti Rai. In the romanization of Bangla, you actually write it R-O-Y, which in English you pronounce Roy, but in Bangla that's Rai. So all the A's are O's and the O's are A's. It's very complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes romanization systems don't make as much sense as you want them to.
No, exactly. It's been very difficult trying to learn Bangla, let me tell you.
Okay. So, but you were born in the UK.
Yeah. My mum's English and my dad moved over here. So I was born here.
I see. Okay. So, how long have you been making comics?
I think I started when I was about 18, so about 10 years ago. Honestly, I had nothing to do. I wasn't in college, and I was like, I want to take up a hobby. I want to try and do something, and I already loved writing, so I was like, maybe I should give drawing a go. And I started, and I really loved it. And I've always read comics, and so I just wanted to like take part in the creating part of it. So yeah, about 10 years.
I see. What other comics have influenced you the most?
I think for me, I grew up with the classics like Tintin, but also the Beano. I was part of the Beano Club when I was a kid. I was obsessed. I used to go around boot fairs and collect as many Beanos I could find, and I would read and read and read. So,
yeah, Americans are not too familiar with that. I've heard of it, but what is that exactly?
It's like I think the main comic strip of the Beano is Dennis the Menace, and I think there was like an American version of Dennis the Menace that came out at the exact same time as the British version.
Oh.
But it's about this little boy who creates mischief with his dog. And,
I see. Okay.
Yeah, it's very fun. As a child, it was very, very fun. That's what kind of got me into it. And then my mum loved Tintin, so she gave me Tintin like comics, and yeah, that helped me get into it as well.
Okay. So what tools do you use making a comic, and what makes them the best tools for you?
Well, for me, it's pretty much always been digital. I think I started kind of drawing things very crudely in Photoshop, and I've now moved on to using Clip Studio. For me, it works the best. It's a much cheaper and kind of better version for comics making, in my opinion. It's got a lot of tools specifically for creating comics. And also, just as Photoshop kind of went down the subscription model, it became a slightly less accessible for people.
Yeah.
And I do think that comics is just one of those forms of creating media that is for everybody. Like, anyone can do it, and it should be as accessible as possible. Obviously, the most accessible thing is pencil and paper. But yeah, for me, digital, I think there's something about, I find color really, really important, and finding the exact right colors. And so just being able to drop in colors and switch them out and change them up and experiment in a way that you can't really do on paper because you've only got one try.
Yeah. Make copies of your pencils and then color different ones, but that takes a long time.
It does. I did do that for a while. Like when I was at uni, I had a tutor who really didn't like digital, really. And so she encouraged me to do more traditional media, which is nice. I think it can look really, really nice. But for me and the way that I work, it didn't quite jam. So the digital route is the one for me.
Okay. So on Sennen, how long did you spend on the script and the art chores?
Well, the script is interesting because I actually wrote it as a novel first. That was also when I was about 18, so just around the time I started drawing. I think I just wrote the novel. I did that thing where you write a novel in a month. So I did that. And then as I was kind of trying to find a new story post-university, I picked up this novel that I'd found and be like, oh, I could adapt this. It's some free material. And then the art choices, I'd been doing like a lot of research about folk tales and folk mythology, especially like British folk mythology. And so I wanted to base like a lot of the decisions around that. So when it comes to a lot of the colours, a lot of the costumes that the different characters are wearing, it's very much based on that kind of mythology, folklore stuff.
Okay. And how long did all of this take? How much time?
Oh gosh. So initially it wasn't supposed to take that long. It took, I think that the initial planning stages took maybe 6-7 months. But then unfortunately, right when I started drawing, I got diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And so I got sick unexpectedly, and I wasn't expecting. So from then to now, I think that was in 2017. So that's how long it's been since then. That's how long it took from, and a lot of that was planning stages. And then, so I think probably ultimately maybe a year and a bit for planning, and then the rest of the time drawing. But yeah.
So when you were adapting your novel to your graphic novel, did you make any changes in the story? Like you said, oh, this should really be this way instead. Did that ever happen?
Yeah, for sure. Because some stuff just doesn't play as well in a graphic novel format. I think in the original novel, there was a lot of actual magic in the novel.
Oh, wow.
Like there was a lot of magic, a lot of lore. And when I was adapting into a graphic novel, I kind of decided that I'd like to, without spoiling, like, I wanted the magic to be a bit more magical, mystical, like not necessarily real. Whereas before it was much more fantasy-ish. And as I kind of decided what I wanted the character to be like and what kind of journey I wanted her to go on, for me it made sense to remove some of that magic and make it a bit more grounded.
Okay.
I suppose.
I see. So this is your first published anything, is that right? I mean, I saw on your website you self-published some things, but...
Yeah, this is my first proper published thing. Yeah, the previous... I'd only published like one proper like comic before then, and it was self-published. So this is the first thing that's been published by an actual publisher, post-university. So yeah, it's very exciting. Yeah,
so how was it working with an editor for the first time?
Do you know, quite nice. I think I found it difficult sometimes. There were times when I thought I'd finished the book and I'd send it over and then get told no, like this is wrong, like this doesn't flow very well, you need to fix this. And obviously I think if I had been working on in full health and everything, for me that would have been a challenge that I would have accepted willingly. But not being in the best health, being told you have to do like an extra 10 pages or whatnot, that's kind of like, oh no, this is going to take me months and months.
Oh my.
So yeah, sometimes difficult, but also I think it's nice because you kind of have this safety net where you've got other people to help you, other people to rely on. I find that when I'm doing it all by myself, I like having that level of control, but also you will look back at things and be like, I wish that I'd changed that or fixed that or made that mistake or changed that mistake. When you have an editor, they can do that stuff for you. And even if at the time you don't necessarily agree, later on you look at it and you go, yeah, you were right.
I see. So what's the significance of the title Sennen? I'm having trouble
Sennen.
Not saying it in Japanese.
That's okay. Well, basically, it's just the name of the main character, and all of the names in the book are based on place names in the UK.
Okay.
So Sennen is a place in Cornwall that I've been to a lot and really love. There's a place called Sennen Cove, and I think like based on the story's kind of set in some vague future, and so I thought it would be a nice idea that even in the future where people have forgotten what these places are, they still keep the names of the places as their names, and they're kind of passed down like that. In the way that people might not necessarily know the origins of the name John, but they still name their child John, So I thought, so that's the thing, yeah. So someone's called Sennen, not knowing that it's based on this place that probably doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, and so there's a character called Hat with 2 T's, and is that a place name also?
That's a place.
Okay, where is Hat?
I think it's also in Cornwall. Most of the places are in Cornwall, just because I love Cornwall. It's a really gorgeous part of the UK, and yeah, there's just lots of caves and coves and sea, and I think it kind of makes a bit of sense when you get towards the end of the novel.
Okay,
why I made those choices, maybe.
Yeah, and my UK geography is not the greatest, but Cornwall is in Wales, isn't it?
No, but
no.
It's
almost.
It's like under it's under Wales. It's
okay.
Kind of very, very southernly. It's the most
peninsula
southerly
down there.
part.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I'm getting mixed up with something else, but okay.
Wales is also gorgeous though. And and there probably are some place names from Wales that I've shoved in there too, so.
Okay, but Cornwall is part of England.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the significance of the cover image? It hadn't really clicked with me until just today when I was getting ready for the interview. Like, why is she stepping into this big hand?
Yeah, well, I think for me that was the kind of like a symbolic thing of her being lifted out of her world into something completely new. And like both physically and metaphorically, she's being lifted up and out of everything she knows, and it's part of growing up and all of that stuff.
So is the hand your hand then? You're lifting up your character?
Who knows? It may well be.
So when I was reviewing the book with Jason for the first part of this episode, so he thought this ambiguity served the book well, but I'm still curious. So Dad and Baba, are they in a romantic relationship?
Yeah, you
Okay.
guys.
Okay. I
They're
thought.
married.
See, I got all thrown off in that section because even though she addressed him as dad right away, I was still reading this is her mom because the
Right.
character looked feminine to me. And then I got you'll hear in the in the review, but I got confused about family relationships at the beginning, and so okay.
Yeah,
But
it is slightly confusing.
I'm sorry.
It is slightly confusing, as all good families are, I find.
And yeah, it was kind of vague anyway. Even if I read him as a guy right away, but okay.
Yeah.
So, what inspired this story for you?
I think I'm always kind of very drawn to stories that are about that point in life where you kind of realize things about the world. When you it's just growing up, the part of growing up. I tend to always like go towards those sorts of points in the stories that I make. And kind of realizing the world is sometimes a really horrible place, and sometimes there are things that you've been told by the people around you that aren't true, and there are some things that you find out about the world. And yeah, so that's the kind of yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think I read it a little differently from some people. Well, I read the review that was linked from your site by Andy Oliver, and he mentioned it being a coming of age story. And like, well, yeah, I guess it is. But what I mainly got out of it was this kind of global inequality situation that's kind of analogized in the book from real life, and I felt like that was for me anyway, that was the focus.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of kind of coming of age and growing up, is realizing that the world you live in isn't just you. And maybe it's because of my coming of age. When I was a child, when I was around 10 or 11, I kind of was like, wait a second. I think it comes from my upbringing. I have half of my family is white and half my family is Bengali, and my English side of my family, they're kind of like typical middle class English people, and then my Bengali side grew up in poverty, abject poverty, and especially after like the Rana Plaza disaster and things like that in Bangladesh, I was so aware that my cousins on that side were the people who were working in the factories and making the clothes and making all of the goods for the people on this side of my family. And I kind of realized that at about 10 or 11 I was in Bangladesh, and I made a documentary with my mum about street children in Bangladesh, which is a huge problem because there's such poverty there. There are lots of children who are they work on the streets, they collect rubbish and sell it for recycling and things like that. And there's also charities trying to work to help give them skills. And I think seeing that for the first time, the kind of scales fell from my eyes, and I realized what is actually going on in the world. So for me, coming of age around 10, 11, and seeing the massive inequality in the world, they are interconnected in a way that can't be separated, because that's when that happened for me. So yeah, so that's the point as well.
I see. So now, the book, I felt like it was kind of a call to action to the reader, like we need to try to do something. But then I'm like, well, what should we do? Do you have any ideas? Like, what can the average person do to work towards a more equal world?
Exactly. Well, this is it. There's not much.
Yeah.
So the point is that the main character is a child, and the people that she meets are also relatively young, and they are just people, and it's the people in charge who are making these big decisions. And ultimately, like, no matter how outraged you are, no matter how much you want to change, unless you mobilize a huge group of people to kind of create change at the top, it's incredibly difficult. And that feeling of kind of helplessness and like, what can I do to help? I think a lot of us feel that generally. That we hear about all these horrible things happening in the world, and we're like, I want to help, but what can I as an individual do? Like, not much. All you can do is like join movements and try and band together. So part of it is like that, like be involved in a group, because them together is much stronger with different skills as them individually. But also this thing of like, ultimately it is the people at the top, the people in power who have the power to make those changes. And you don't necessarily have to feel guilty or bad if you can't do as much as you want to do, because it's very hard. Yeah.
So I was really interested in the point just before the end, talking about ships that never come back. I don't know. Can you give me a hint there? What's that meant to bring to mind?
Well, it's this thing of that they're kind of always searching for something. In the way that Sennen's always been searching for something. When she's been in her life in the valley, she's always been looking for more. Like, are there people over the mountains? Are there people outside of my village? And in the exact same way, the people in the city above have been doing the same thing. They've been searching for other people. I mean, it's very dystopian, kind of, the whole world's been flooded and we're the only people left in that direct way. But also it's kind of a mirror of what Sennen's always been searching and looking for something. And so is everybody else. Like, everyone's always searching and looking for something. Then they're not focused on what's here now. It's all very much like, but what could be out there? So I don't know. You can interpret that how you want, but
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your target audience for this book?
I'd say maybe like between the ages of 8 and, I don't know, like however old. I think I enjoy it as an adult.
Well, you wrote it.
Right. But I think yeah, probably like maybe that coming of age period from like 8 to 15, 16. Because I think there's a lot to relate to in the character. But then also I think you can relate to her if you're an adult who's been through an experience like that. Because some people don't have kind of these moments of revelation about the world that you live in until they're a bit older.
Yeah.
So I think it's not necessarily related to age. It's more about just growing up in a sense of realizing that you're part of this global community kind of thing.
Okay. So what have you learned about making comics since you finished your first one?
I've learned that it's hard. The one thing that really got me was just kind of continuity and things like that. Because I obviously was drawing this over a very long span of time. It was about 4 years, because I could only do, maybe a page every 2 weeks when I was very ill. And so just kind of naturally, as you draw, you change. And I was finding myself drawing the characters differently as I developed in style and things like that. So having to kind of look back at the beginning and be like, I need to make sure that I'm being consistent. That was tough. I think because the last comic that I did, that was my graduation comic, and I did it in a month. So in terms of continuity and stuff like that, you don't really have to worry about it. It's all done in a very short amount of time. So that was my biggest challenge, I think. And also just interpreting things in a way that's clear for the reader, because I know what I mean and I've got lots of ideas in my head, but sometimes I would get a note back being like, this is very vague. What is this? It's still very vague because I like to keep things vague, but I think it's slightly less vague than it was pre getting notes. So yeah, that's something else that's been a bit of a challenge.
I see. Yeah, making sure what you're saying is getting across to the reader. Like, what you're saying, but
yeah, definitely.
Does the reader know?
In a written novel, it's much easier. You just write what you mean. But when you're in this kind of visual medium, sometimes it can get a bit lost. So that was part of the challenge for sure.
Okay. What kind of comic would you like to do that you haven't done yet?
Oh, that's a good question. I really, really love Chris Ware, and his stuff's just phenomenal. And I love his like Acme novelty library, and the way that like all of these books are kind of different shapes and sizes, but they all have like interweaving stories. So I'd love to take on like a big project like that at some point where everything's part of the same universe. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be possible, but I'd love to do it. I think that's something that has always really appealed to me. So one day in the future, I think that would be a great thing to do.
Okay. Is there a genre that you like to read but you can't picture yourself making a story in?
Yeah, probably like action, kind of sports, like sports action stuff. There's this, oh gosh, I can't remember the name. But there's this comic series I've been reading, which is very much like a basketball fantasy action comic. It's from Nobrow. Someone will know what it's called. I don't recall. But it's I love reading it. I love reading these kind of like very action-based like fight scenes and things, but I can't picture myself ever drawing or writing a fight scene, actually. Who knows? In the future, things might change, but...
Okay. So what's coming next from you?
Well, I have a comic in the works, which is about grief, called The Sometimes Cafe, that I've had on the back burner for a while. And also I'm going to I've started drawing a comic about my experience with fibromyalgia and chronic illness, just because I find that lots of people don't understand it. So I thought, you know what, I'll put it in a very easy to understand format, which is a comic. So yeah, that's going to be for me, but probably not for a while because I'm a slow worker. But keep an eye peeled in the future.
Okay. All right. Well, congratulations on getting this one published, and good to talk to you.
You too. Thank you so much.
Sennen by Shanti Rai comes out from Avery Hill later this month. Different sites give different release dates, but Shanti thinks it's coming out around October 20th. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. The Bebop, an anthology comic that our own Emmett had a part in, has finished its Kickstarter project and it got funded. Emmett thanks all who contributed. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read it and record our critique. After Emmett and I finished our look at Jack Kirby's Fourth World, we found that there's a book that really would have helped us in our research for those episodes. It's Old Gods and New by John Morrow, which explores the history of the creation of the Fourth World, with plenty of quotes from interviews with Jack and others involved. Next week, Emmett talks with John Morrow here on the show. So, an addendum to our Fourth World discussion next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.